Solutions or Omnipotent Costner. I'm going to continue reading Powernomics chapter 3, and this will be the end of it, and this will be all for the night. So, as we were, elements of functional communities. Now that we have identified some of the major menaces and impediments to building Black communities, let's begin to design the kind of communities that we want and need. These communities must be built to overcome all the previously mentioned destructive elements. In the following pages, we will present designs for physical and human communities that can reverse the effects of centuries of social conditioning. The first thing we must do is convert residential neighborhoods into functioning communities that contain 3 key elements or operating systems. First, they should have an independent economy that is wholly owned by residents of the community and provides consumer products, services, businesses, and employment opportunities. Second, they should have an active code of conduct and group accountability. Third, they should have a form of governance that collectively speaks for the residents and is capable of applying political pressure to outside groups. Let's elaborate more fully on these elements. Independent economy. Not one Black neighborhood in America has a Black business economy upon which its members can depend to supply its residents with their daily necessities, products, services, or jobs. As stated earlier, the civil rights movement of the 60s was destructive to urban Black communities in many aspects. Black America would have been much better off had the movement equipped Blacks to be their own job and product producers rather than seekers of the jobs and products of others. If Blacks had become production-oriented rather than consumption-oriented, there is little likelihood that today they would have a hidden national unemployment rate of 34% and live in neighborhoods rather than communities. Today, Black neighborhoods are totally dependent upon whites and other competing groups to supply the products, services, and employment needs of the Black neighborhoods. Code of conduct and group accountability. A code of conduct is a standard of behavior that outlines what is right and wrong within and outside of the community. Within and outside of the community. It serves as a competitive tool that promotes group unity and accountability by suggesting either rewards or punishments for its members based upon how their acts help or hurt the members of the group. The burden for establishing and enforcing a code of conduct typically falls upon the shoulders of the community's basic institutions, the church, family, and school. A code of conduct does several things for the community. First, as a system or collection of rules, it prescribes and justifies how Blacks should think, see, and behave with other individuals and groups. These rules can be explicit or implicit, but either way, they act to govern individual behavior that affects a group. A Black code of conduct is necessary to keep out the destructive behavior that is often evident in Black neighborhoods. Moreover, wealth and power can be built only where there is an enforceable code of conduct. A code of conduct defines inappropriate behavior and impedes it. It also rewards behaviors that uplift and strengthen a group. Any group that is characterized by self-hate, a lack of group self-interest, disorganization, and other social pathologies must implement a code of conduct in order to build an organized society and maintain an infrastructure that includes schools, healthcare systems, and other human services. Once a code of conduct has been articulated, it should be adopted and communicated through schools, neighborhood organizations, churches, and families so that it reaches all the residents. It must not only become a guide to appropriate behavior, but also a guide towards accountability and the development of penalties for inappropriate behavior. The code of conduct should be carefully taught to Black children so that each generation will know what is expected of it. Among other things, Black youth need to know how they should treat other members of their family and community, how to conduct themselves at school, in church, or in the community, and how to show respect for themselves, their property, as well as the property of others. A code of conduct must effectively discourage Sambo behavior that was once known as Uncle Tomism. This kind of behavior is extremely detrimental to community building. It is nearly impossible to eliminate because dominant society rushes to reward it. Samboism is a means of social control that extends all the way back to slavery. The majority society has always needed a few Blacks who will sell out their race for their own personal gains. The practice of Samboism has continued for more than a century after slavery ended because there is still not a prescribed code of conduct that either forbids it or imposes consequences to those who engage in it as a means of selling out their race. The consequences for Samboism can vary from social sanctions to economic penalties. In some cities, Black activists Community organizations posted pictures of samples on yard signs and billboards. Others publicly issue sample certificates and Hayward Shepherd awards. Hayward Shepherd was a black man who was killed by John Brown's raiding party for trying to warn the town of Harper's Ferry, Virginia, that raiders were there to free black slaves. The punishment for violating code and behavior standards must be sure and swift. It is important that every member of the community understands that the community will enforce the code and protect itself. A code of conduct will be necessary to communicate new team standards. Some blacks have behaved in their individual self-interest when they perceived disorganization, self-destructive behavior, and mixed signals among blacks to mean that there was no functioning skin color team. Those who choose to change their behavior, to re-identify with the team, and to take part in helping the group achieve self-sufficiency and competitiveness will need a code of conduct as a guide to new behaviors. It can show those who have position and celebrity status in sports, entertainment, corporate America, or in government how to benefit and strengthen the group. Social and political governance. Lastly, a a functional black community should have a structure of social and political governance that regulates community institutions and represents the collective interests of the community. All across America, black neighborhoods are administered and governed by whites, even in cities where black elected officials are already in place. Whites set the rules, blacks are expected to obey. This pattern of domination was achieved with the full knowledge and support of both white and black societies. Once blacks get into a stronger position, they should not allow whites or any other group to represent them in competitive situations. To do so constitutes a conflict of interest. However, for the moment, whites control all the institutions within black neighborhoods. They derive the benefits of the authority, income, jobs, and business opportunities from governing in both white and black communities. Moreover, they determine what services black people receive and the products or opportunities that exist within the black neighborhoods. It is now imperative that blacks put themselves in positions, socially and politically, to represent and be responsible for their own community. This will not be easy. Even when blacks are duly and legally elected to public office, they often do not make governing decisions that are in the best interest of their black constituents. Once in office, they often become sensitive to approval ratings and the need for re-election funds. Since blacks rarely conduct polls or vote based on criteria other than popularity and have little money for campaign contributions, blacks seeking or holding public office find it more advantageous to secure the approval of white society. They believe white dollars will come to them while they are in an office, as well as when they leave public service. They harbor no such notions about black dollars. In the case of black elected officials, they are restricted from assisting the black community because they do not control public or private resources. The dominant society makes sure that public resources follow the control of the white elected officials. Protecting their own best interests, they do not want the levers of control in black hands. Most know or suspect that it is easier to ideologically and politically control and economically exploit disorganized blacks who lack both physical communities and a strong sense of community. Andrew Hacker, in this book, Two Nations, discussed how whites fear blacks and hold strong beliefs that political controls should never be surrendered to black people. Under this system of white domination, black elected officials, political power is mostly symbolic. Withholding control of public resources from black officials is a standard operating procedure. Blacks will not voluntarily be given control, regardless of whether the city's black population is the minority or the majority. Without tangible resources and power, it is nearly impossible for the properly intentioned black elected official or the black community to compete. Nationalism and pluralism. Since nationalism and pluralism allow millions of ethnic immigrants to compete as a group, they have the potential to do the same for blacks. Devotion to one's own cultural group or nation is called nationalism. Nationalism helps groups build communities, mobilize for power, and control resources. It allows cultural groups to function as nations with nations. Black Americans are a nation within a nation that have never behaved in a manner consistent with this reality. In our pluralistic society, many groups are nationalistic. They form their nation of peoplehood based on common underlying characteristics from skin color to language. Nationalism is based upon a sense of community and can make it easier for blacks to build a cohesive group within the nation. As an excluded nation living on the margins of American society, blacks have marched, prayed, and fought to be accepted in the mainstream society. They have wanted to be a part of a nation rather than to be a nation. Blacks need to merge and begin to compete based on the reality of where they are. They are an obsolete labor class that is reluctant to build and live in their own communities. Unlike blacks, European ethnic groups built, worked, learned, and thrived in their individual respective ethnic communities up until the end of World War II. Then they proclaimed their whiteness, abandoned their ethnic communities, and assimilated into the majority white society to help fend off the civil rights movement's push for social integration. Thus, today there is solid white unity among Germans, Italians, English, Polish, Greeks, and other ethnic groups on racial matters and black people. New ethnic immigrants are exercising an old assimilation option. Arabs, Asians, Eastern Europeans, and Hispanics are building and maintaining their own ethnic communities again. Ethnic enclaves and black nationalism. First generation ethnic immigrants typically build their own independent communities before assimilating into the larger society during the second generation. They retain their ethnic communities as socioeconomic alternatives. A second generation Chinese, Arab, or Hispanic person can always go back to his ethnic community if he feels rejected by other whites. Whether they practice separation or assimilation, ethnic immigrants openly demonstrate the advantages of ethno-aggregation and nationalism. Nationalism gives them an internal sense of peoplehood and a cultural base. It also functions as an umbilical cord to their network of communities in their countries of origin. These communities have served the political and economic needs of American ethnic immigrants for centuries. On the other hand, white America is threatened by any form of competitive black nationalism. Whites prefer that blacks remain unchanged, the models of patriotism and democratic principles. They want black people to be passive and captive consumers who live in black neighborhoods and remain out of sight and out of mind. Nationalism and pluralism can help blacks build independent communities as well as promote their own self-interest. All major population groups in America except blacks practice a form of nationalism, although they do not publicly call it nationalism. As indicated in Figure 8, nationalism is practiced whenever a racial or ethnic group is devoted to and acts on behalf of the interests of its own cultural group or nation. Spanish-speaking groups, under the label of Latinos and Hispanics, practice nationalism by attempting to build a nation within America using the Spanish language to empower them to rights, space, and power. Jews, Mormons, and the Amish are examples of groups who have used their religion to establish a peoplehood and a nationalistic identity. Chinatowns, French towns, and Polish towns are cultural enclaves built on a strong sense of peoplehood and nationalism. American Indian tribes are cultural and ethnic groups that feel a sense of peoplehood and pride themselves on being a nation within a nation. More than any group, the majority white society has always been a race-based group with pride in its European nationalism and patriotism. As stated earlier, black Americans remain the exception, but not totally by choice. Black Americans are without a sense of peoplehood and community and tend to be afraid of black nationalism and Afrocentrism simply because the majority white society is also afraid. Though black Americans, possibly more than any other group, have both the right and justification to be nationalistic, they have consistently elected not to be. Aggregation in urban cities. A great competitive advantage for black Americans is the fact that they currently sit on some of the most valuable and best located real estate, whether they are called inner cities or urban ghettos. Since blacks are the dominant population in a large number of cities, practicing ethno-aggregation and vertical integration can easily convert these areas into prime black business communities with just a little stretch of the imagination and capital. Most of these areas already have blacks in political office. Using black accountability, voters could easily mobilize to remove the politicians who operate from self-interest and a non-black perspective. Their replacements should be committed new leadership that will mobilize resources and practice majority win politics. Table 4 shows a partial list of cities that blacks can convert into communities where black economic and political empowerment could thrive. Detroit, Gary, Indiana, Inglewood, Cali, Highland Park, Michigan, D.C., Atlanta, Birmingham, Alabama, New Orleans, Baltimore, Jacksonville, Florida, Jackson, Mississippi, Norfolk, Virginia, New York, Chicago, Philly, L.A., Houston, Memphis, Dallas, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Milwaukee, St. Louis. Oh, look at that. Buffalo, New York. Ain't that something? Go ahead. Okay. Where was I? Since blacks are the dominant population in major cities, they have political potential to build major industries and establish vertical control. In the cities listed in the third column of Table 4, blacks make up less than the dominant population. and use ethno aggregation and brutal integration to build alternative structures or maroon towns. This is an appropriate historic name for these communities. When enslaved blacks escaped from the plantation and into the woods, they joined with other black runaways and built independent and self-sufficient communities that they called maroon towns. Inside each black minority cities, blacks have sufficient resources to build at least one major maroon town with its own business centers or street malls. Also, there are suburban neighborhoods all across America that could be converted into viable, self-sufficient black communities instead of simply remaining black neighborhoods. For example, Prince George's County in Maryland has the honor of being the wealthiest black neighborhood in America. As a suburb of Washington, D.C., it has attracted blacks out of the district and now has the highest concentration of the most educated blacks in America. Yet, it remains simply a residential area where some of the nation's wealthiest blacks merely eat and sleep. They did not build a community that was self-sufficient and competitive economically. There are at least 21 black municipalities that could easily be transformed from residential neighborhoods to functional communities. Most of these municipalities, such as Inglewood and Richmond, California, either have black majorities or elected bodies where blacks make up the majority. Other smaller cities, such as Highland Park and Benton Harbor, Michigan, and Gary, Indiana, are approximately 80% black. With visionary leadership and a can-do attitude, blacks could convert these economically and politically weak neighborhoods into competitive communities. Rebuilding can begin by staking out competitive space on which to build and operate. When the black civil rights movement ran its course, urban blacks exercised newfound social freedoms by integrating into previously all-white suburbs, businesses, and schools. Upwardly mobile middle-class blacks abandoned black cities to establish black neighborhoods in white suburbs, subsequently surrendering control of their property, institutions, and culture. As blacks began to rebuild their physical communities and establish economic control of their inner cities, they would surely clash with whites and ethnic immigrants. Whites are seeking to retake the old urban areas under a new gentrification concept called regionalization. Regionalization allows whites to hold on to their suburban territories while their majority legislative bodies push suburban legal boundaries into urban areas and bring them under one regional government controlled by whites. Under regionalization, whites seek to control all government, public institutions, and properties. They recently discovered that it was a mistake to abandon the urban cities to blacks following the civil rights movement. Though whites have cannibalized the cities, the locations themselves and the remaining infrastructures are still valuable. The wealthy and power elite want them back. If whites are successful in retaking black neighborhoods and cities, blacks will be back where they were a century ago. They will own and control nothing. Worse, they will have to compete with new ethnic immigrants as well as whites for space in cities like Detroit. Many black elected officials in black cities are co-conspirators in regionalization. Buffalo, they invite whites to reverse the outward migration of the 1960s and come back into the cities. Black elected officials give away their city's assets, prime property, privatized public services, control over the schools, court systems, and public water and sewage plants to draw whites back into black cities. Scant rewards, incentives, or special programs are devised to empower blacks who live in those communities. Only a few black public officials are trying to hold on to their neighborhoods and control of government. It is clear by their actions that whites are determined to regain ownership and control of the power, land, and resources in the cities. The same whites who work to keep control of black assets criticize the way blacks live and would never allow conditions similar to those in black neighborhoods to exist in their communities. Black America must build and maintain communities to satisfy its own needs, not the economic and political needs of whites and other groups that want unrestricted access to their neighborhoods. Black neighborhoods should first and foremost be for black people. When I articulated this concept on national radio, a white gentleman called in and said he felt white and ethnic immigrants ought to have a right to make their living in black neighborhoods. This caller missed the point. There is no disagreement that non-blacks have a right to establish businesses in black neighborhoods, but blacks have the same rights that whites and other groups have to withhold economic support when they choose. Black Americans will get more respect and economic political power if they do not support any business or ethnic group that engages in practices adverse to blacks. No law or public policy can make blacks spend their money in non-black owned businesses. If it were illegal to boycott, then nearly all of white America and its ethnic subgroups would be liable for contravention of the law since they have boycotted and exploited black neighborhoods and black businesses for centuries. Boundary maintenance. excuse me. An important task in building new black communities is establishing and maintaining community boundaries. It is a common sight to see animals mark their territory. Humans operate at a higher level, but they too establish boundary lines then mark them. The majority society closes its community using markers such as skin color, religion, ethnicity, and languages. Community markings also vary with the wealth and political clout of the group. Those with the greater wealth and political clout will typically have more prominent markings. Wealthy communities are marked and closed by signs, gates, and security guards. Ethnic communities such as Chinatowns are marked symbolically, often by ornate oriental gates. Koreatown and Little Havana are marked and closed by flags in foreign language. Hispanics claim and mark space in closed communities using Spanish language. As the society becomes increasingly pluralistic, groups stake out, mark, and close their turf. That is every group except Black America. That is every group except Black America. Black America can build communities, but to keep them and have them achieve their objectives, they ought to be marked and closed. Marking is one of the first practices that we should institute as part of our code of conduct once our communities are up and doing business. We must rank our communities the way other groups do. By marking our communities, we must mark, not rank, pardon me. We must By marking our communities, we send a message that these communities belong to us. Today, there are no positive signs that identify black neighborhoods and say, this is ours. When black Americans begin to mark territory, it does not mean that others are unwelcome any more than when Arabs, Chinese, or Hispanics mark their communities. Do the pagodas in Chinatown mean that non-Chinese cannot eat there? To the contrary, marked boundaries invite all to come, but primarily as customers and visitors. Language is an index of culture. It is routinely used by immigrant groups to mark and close their communities. Language is a unifying element and it allows native speakers to do business within the community while limiting others. It brings status and importance to the people, culture, and community. Visitors to Chinatown, Koreatown, Little Saigon, or any other culturally strong communities might feel some discomfort because they do not speak the language. Others often feel resentful because they feel this is America and everyone should be speaking English, the national language. Public laws in some cities, such as Miami, require that all public announcements be in both English and Spanish. Most of the public notices, business signs, newspapers, and advertisements are in Spanish. Immigrant enclaves, like the Hispanic and Asian communities of today, are very much aware that they are marking and closing their communities. Cubans are an example of a group that used language to mark and close their community and to gain competitive advantages. The first major influx of Cubans began to arrive in this country in the late 60s. They soon acquired major control of both the private and public sectors of Dade County and Miami, Florida. In one of their first acts of power, they enacted a city ordinance that declared Miami a bilingual city. Non-Spanish speaking people had to learn Spanish to interact with Cuban communities. Millions of dollars are now earmarked to print public information in both English and Spanish. Even the Miami Herald publishes a daily newspaper that is primarily bilingual. Most business and public jobs require a facility with Spanish. Blacks who previously held most of the hotel and lower level city jobs were fired because they did not speak Spanish. Cubans and others demanded bilingual education classes for all students while using the Spanish language to mark and close their communities. Since blacks do not have an official language, they cannot use language to mark and close their communities to competing groups. The language disadvantage of blacks was revealed in the Ebonics issue in Oakland, California toward the end of the 1990s. The local school board had requested federal bilingual funds to teach English to black children who spoke Ebonics. Not only were they turned down at the federal level, they incurred the wrath of many blacks and black leaders who saw no value in recognizing black language. The Oakland debacle illustrates the bigger problem blacks face. If they had maintained their communities, built a business structure that provided their people jobs and wealth building opportunities, their children could have had the same advantages accorded ethnic immigrants. They could have remained in their communities for the rest of their lives, speaking Ebonics or any other language of their choosing. Instead, black children are required to meet the language standards of immigrant communities because they are the largest, if not the only group of Americans who regularly abandon their own people and communities to live with other groups in their communities. Black communities are vulnerable and unmarked. They do not have gate signs or other markers or barriers. They are wide open to transit traffic and activities from outsiders. Open black communities are prime targets for those who wish to exploit blacks economically and politically. Unclothed black communities are vulnerable to toxic waste and illegal activities such as drugs, prostitution, fencing, and gambling. The black residents are not sufficiently organized to deal with these illegal activities, which are typically controlled by powerful forces outside of black communities. Open communities cannot control the goods and services within them. Competing groups can enter, confiscate, and exploit the host community. They can control black politicians, start competitive businesses that drain off capital, sell inferior products, or commit acts that are injurious to the local residents. A residential neighborhood cannot protect or sustain itself until it becomes a functional community. Levels of a functional community. Once we have put together the elements for a functional community, an independent economy, a code of conduct, and a form of government, our team now has a foundation from which to compete politically and economically. We become more familiar with each other and can rally around our collective needs, experiences, and goals. We can now begin to move our communities to higher levels of functioning as illustrated in Figure 10 below. Our paradigm of vertical integration can be applied to community development. Vertical community development establishes a community sense of direction, authority, and a collective interest. Members of the community live by a code of conduct based upon principles that dictate how they relate to, care for, respect, and support each other. Once people have confidence that others in the community can be relied upon to help support them, a sense of mutual trust evolves and cooperation can follow. Humans cooperate with people they have learned to trust. Once people are cooperating, they then have the capability to hold members of the group accountable for their behavior. All members of a community cannot be relied upon to live by a code of conduct alone. Some will undermine and sell out the community. They will not contribute to its collective development or support blackness. A functional community must have a means to protect itself and to hold its members accountable. Other groups have always had formal and informal mechanisms to reward or punish members of the group who intentionally engage in behavior that is inappropriate and injurious to the community. Black America must have some institutional community organizations that will hold members accountable to the code of conduct. With the community developing trust, cooperation, and accountability, as indicated in Figure 10, black people will be able to function as a competitive team in the marketplace. Conclusion: the success of our national empowerment plan to a great degree depends on our ability to build, mark, and close physical communities and develop mindsets that connect us one to another. Integration destroys communities, it does not build them. Community building is organized around people with common goals who appreciate and recognize each member's contribution to the overall group goals. A competitive community is one that operates upon competitive advantages. Within our national network, we must build competitive communities that contain social, political, economic, religious, educational, and geographic assets that act as foundations of power. Communities are repositories for black assets. The Powernomics National Plan offers research and strategies to build functional communities, but the work of implementing the strategies is necessarily a local function. Some neighborhoods will be able to use out-of-the-box thinking and mobilize for change. Others will talk about what they should do and not progress much beyond discussions. Some neighborhoods and communities will never even get to the discussion stage. Each black neighborhood should articulate a common set of beliefs and values regarding taking business risks, making a commitment to savings and investment, striving to achieve uniformly high educational standards, abiding by a code of personal and group conduct, and supporting a trust system, a team spirit, ethos, and group self-interest. The primary obligation of a community is to equip its members to live and compete successfully in the domestic and global society of today and tomorrow. Those community members who are able to make this work will become the new black leaders because they will know how to apply the Powernomics vision in order to achieve black empowerment. Peace. Get your I Support Black Business team. The link is on Homebasedbusiness.solutions on Facebook, as well as Omnipotent Costa on Facebook. Peace.